I am Emily, 34 years old. I live with my husband Thomas, who is the same age as me, and our second-grade son Luke. My husband is a gym instructor, and I support our family while doing housework and part-time work. Until our son started elementary school, our family of 3 lived peacefully, but 2 years ago, when my mother-in-law moved near our apartment, our lives began to change little by little. My father-in-law passed away from illness when my husband was 5, and without siblings, the mother-in-law seems to be an irreplaceable person to my husband. Although he seems unaware of it, I think he is a mama's boy. According to my husband, the mother-in-law was mentally unwell after his father's death and couldn't do housework or raise children properly. Thus, my husband lived with his aunt from the age of 5 until he entered middle school for about 8 years. Because of this debt, the mother-in-law is excessively sweet to him, and even now, as a grown adult, she still wants to take care of him. Understanding their situation of raising a child alone, I thought it was somewhat understandable, so I overlooked the mother-in-law's behavior. However, since the mother-in-law moved nearby, her abnormal behavior became increasingly noticeable. It's too late now, but I should have been more aware of the crisis in their actions. Had I done so, I might have noticed their abnormal inner world sooner. I never imagined that my husband and mother-in-law would engage in actions that go against decency. She began visiting our home almost daily, claiming to visit my husband and son. When I returned from part-time work, I would find her waiting inside using a spare key, starting to complain about dinner. She never helped, yet she would criticize the seasoning and the way food was cut. After dinner, she would stay until my husband returned, and on some nights, she stayed until just before midnight. Besides preparing dinner, I had other tasks such as driving my son to his extracurricular activities and household chores, so I was annoyed by the mother-in-law's long visits. Even when I told my husband, he would say to just let it slide, always taking her side. If that was all, it would be bearable, but the mother-in-law revealed an outrageous fact during dinner. She said she had hired a private detective to investigate my background before marrying my husband. She wanted to know if I was a suitable person to be his wife. Moreover, my husband knew about this request, and I couldn't hide my shock. She made plausible excuses, saying she wanted to know what kind of person would marry her son, but that meant she had doubted me. After learning this, I developed distrust toward both her and my husband. Around this time, my husband began visiting the mother-in-law's house more often. He had already been returning late and going out on weekends, so I had been suspicious. Thinking he might be lying about visiting his in-laws to cheat, I called their house several times, and sure enough, my husband was there. When I asked the mother-in-law, she said my husband was helping with high places and fixing broken appliances that she couldn't handle. She would say it was ridiculous to suspect my husband, and she would blame me. No matter what she said, my suspicions remained. I decided to follow my husband as usual and barged into his in-laws' house without notice. There, I witnessed an unbelievable scene, giving me the greatest shock and surprise of my life. The mother-in-law, who welcomed me at the door with suspicious behavior, immediately made me suspicious. At the entrance, there were cute pumps for young women. Ignoring the mother-in-law's stop, I entered the house. In the living room, I saw my husband sitting with a woman in her mid-20s on the sofa. Seeing this, I was certain of my husband's affair. When I asked my husband for an explanation, he acknowledged the affair without a hint of remorse. According to him, the woman was his ex-girlfriend Rose, an office worker at a major company, earning several times more than me. They had reunited a few months ago at the gym where my husband worked. The mother-in-law, who apparently favored Rose, believed my husband would marry her. It seems she suggested using the in-laws' house as a place for the affair. She, approving of the affair, also helped create my husband's alibi to keep it from me. Unbelievably despicable mother and son. My anger reached its peak when I confronted my husband and the mother-in-law. My husband, as if defiant, said,
"We're getting divorced, so it's fine, right?"
The mother-in-law, smiling happily, said, "It's better for both of us." Even when I tried to argue, they wouldn't let me have a chance to retort. The mistress Rose looked down on me, smirking, watching the scene. Then my husband presented the signed divorce papers.
"I'll pay alimony and compensation, so let's get divorced."
I grabbed the divorce papers and tried to leave. Then, Rose, who had been silent until then, said, "Sorry, wife. He says I'm better, you know." Smugly, Rose spoke, and my husband added,
"You should be grateful for what we did as a couple."
The mother-in-law also said, "They are like night and day compared to you. You're useless now, haha." I restrained my urge to cry and, with a desperate voice, shouted, "I'm relieved to be free from scum like you. From now on, I won't help you in any way." The husband and mother-in-law laughed at me, saying, yeah, in a dismissive manner. Leaving their hateful laughter behind, I left the in-laws' house. Then, my husband and I divorced, and of course, I got custody. Although we moved out of my ex-husband's apartment, I rented an apartment near the school so that I wouldn't have to transfer my son. Apologizing to my son for the sudden divorce, he comforted me, saying,
"I'm here for you, Mom."
Seeing my son trying to act strong to hide his shock, I firmly decided that I would never forgive my ex-husband and his family for making my son suffer like this. A month later, I heard from an acquaintance that my ex-husband and Rose were getting married, and my anger rekindled at their quick remarriage without considering our son. I decided to take revenge on them. No matter what the world thinks, I will not forgive them. Now, it's time for punishment. On the day of the ex-husband and Rose's wedding, I visited the wedding venue. Checking the guests, there were, as expected, many colleagues and bosses from both ex-husbands and Rose's workplaces, including my former mother-in-law. I couldn't enter the venue as I wasn't invited. So, I found the wedding planner, pretended to be Rose's friend, and entrusted him with something. After completing my errand, I left the venue immediately. The next day, I called my ex-husband. I knew he shouldn't have answered, but I had to see if he was shocked. He answered the phone, completely dispirited, his voice lifeless. In a weak, unfamiliar voice, he said,
"Emily, what do you want?"
I said, "I heard yesterday was your wedding. I thought I'd congratulate you, though a day late." Trying to stifle a laugh, I said to him. After a while of silence, he replied,
"I broke off the engagement with Rose,"
in a trembling voice, and began to recount what happened yesterday. After friends and colleagues finished their performances, an unexpected video letter from Rose's friend was played. It seems Rose had heard from the planner beforehand but allowed it without suspicion. The video letter was simple, with a dark screen and subtitles of the audio. However, the content of the video shocked everyone at the venue. The video letter recorded the revelation of my ex-husband, Rose, and the mother-in-law's affair conversation, which took place when I barged into their house. The mother-in-law's role in providing the affair location and their cruel and vicious remarks were exposed in front of everyone. Naturally, my ex-husband, Rose, and the mother-in-law were fiercely criticized by the guests. My ex-husband and Rose couldn't endure the criticism and broke off their engagement immediately. He couldn't bear the cold stares from his colleagues and bosses and resigned voluntarily. Rose's parents cut ties with her, and she lost her job, moving out of the luxury apartment to the countryside. It was self-inflicted, but she faced the bitter consequences. After my ex-husband finished talking, I mercilessly said, "Well, that's karma, right? By the way, just so you know, I'm the one who asked them to play that video letter, haha." Hearing this, my ex-husband,
You don't mess with me.
He started to yell, so I got annoyed and hung up the phone. A year later, my ex-husband and his mother rented a cheap apartment and started living together. They had planned to rely on Rose's financial support to live comfortably, but with the broken engagement, that dream was completely shattered. To pay for monthly child support and alimony, my ex-husband now works both as a truck driver and at temporary jobs. He often complains about how exhausting it is, as he spends long hours away from home. His mother tried supporting him by working part-time, but with her personality, she couldn't keep any job for long. She uses her meager pension for living expenses, but it hardly makes a difference, according to my ex-husband. Since our divorce, I've become a full-time employee, and every week, my ex-husband shamelessly asks for a reduction in child support or to borrow $1,000 because he's really struggling. But since they brought this upon themselves, I never gave in to his demands. Seeing my ex-husband and his mother struggling with their tight living conditions, I felt I had already achieved sufficient revenge. However, I had no idea how truly dangerous his mother was. I never dreamed that his mother's reckless behavior would lead to a major incident. I noticed something was off with his mother's behavior on the day my son had a rare visit with my ex-husband. After the divorce, my ex-husband requested to see our son once a month, and reluctantly, I agreed. However, I did not allow visits with his mother, and this was stipulated in the mediation agreement, so I thought she understood this. After my son came back from meeting his father, I always asked him in detail about what they talked about. People might laugh at me for worrying too much about my son, but on this particular day, my son said something concerning. While he was meeting his father at a family restaurant, his grandmother kept calling his father's phone, begging to see her grandson, which my son found frightening due to her abnormal persistence. After hearing this, I immediately warned my ex-husband to keep his mother in check, but from that day on, her behavior became increasingly erratic. The worst part was that their apartment was very close to my son's route to school, so she started lying in wait for him on his way home. Sometimes she would appear in front of him, pretending it was a coincidence, and forcibly give him sweets. I got a compliance order through family court to prevent her from contacting my son, but her bizarre behavior didn't stop. As I started considering moving for my son's safety, an incident finally occurred. That day, as usual, I checked the GPS on my son's kid's phone from work to see if he had returned home. However, the phone seemed to be turned off as there was no response. Feeling suspicious, I left work early and hurriedly set out to find my son. An hour later, I found him, as expected, at my ex-husband and his mother's apartment. When I arrived at the apartment, my ex-husband, whom I had contacted in advance, came back a little later. I made him unlock the door, pushed past his startled mother, and found my son watching TV in the living room. Relieved he was safe, my relief was short-lived as I immediately confronted his mother. She admitted to forcibly taking my son home from school and turning off his kid's phone to prevent me from tracking him. His mother. What's the big deal? She nonchalantly explained that she went to see my son because she felt lonely with her son being away so often for work. Angered by her lack of remorse, I shouted, "What you did is kidnapping," and called the police right there. This alarmed her. "How could you do this? You've taken everything from us, and now you want to get me arrested too? You heartless person." She had the audacity to get angry at me. Reaching my limit with her self-pity, I said, "Isn't this just karma? And you're the heartless one here." Driven by anger, I continued. Seeing her frown in confusion, I decided to expose her hidden past to my ex-husband. "I heard this from your sister," I began. According to the sister who raised my ex-husband for 8 years, the story about his mother losing her mind after his father died was a lie to protect my ex-husband. In reality, she was a terrible woman. She had a habit of cheating since they first got married, even while her husband was hospitalized. After her husband passed away, she became completely reckless, indulging in affairs and neglecting housework and childcare. Seeing this, her sister decided to take in my ex-husband while keeping the truth hidden. By the time my ex-husband was in junior high, she had calmed down with her affairs, and they started living together again. Hearing the truth, my ex-husband was stunned into silence. His mother. "That's not true. This must be a made-up story." She desperately tried to explain. "You had a detective investigate me thoroughly before our marriage, yet you're the one with a shady past." I was shocked. I said with a laugh. My words seemed to hit her hard, as she collapsed on the spot, while my ex-husband looked down at her with disgust. Devastated by her beloved son's attitude, she began to sob and was taken away by the arriving police officers. Afterwards, she was arrested and received a suspended sentence, but my ex-husband completely abandoned her after learning the truth. She lost her home and her beloved son. She apparently went back to her hometown, relying on relatives, but due to her past misdeeds, she now lives with a very narrow sense of shame. I decided to move after this incident. My son also expressed a desire to avoid any involvement with his father's family, so I plan to petition the family court to refuse further visitation. I won't be giving my ex-husband our new address or phone number. From now on, I plan to cut off all ties and start a new life with my son. Although my ex-husband hesitated until the end, when I mentioned, should I file for an increase in child support, he finally agreed. I managed to find a new job at our new location, but I realized the need to gain some qualifications for future security. I plan to make time to study for certifications. Though my son had to change schools because of the move,
I'm confident I can do well anywhere, so I'm fine.
He showed a positive attitude. Following his lead, I also intend to live positively. How did you like today's story? Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.